Hey y'all, my name is Adriana Vilela, and this is a brief demo of how errors are reported in OpenTelemetry. We will be creating error spans and error logs and use the OTel Collector to emit those to an observability backend and to the collector's stdout via the logging exporter. You can check out the detailed setup instructions in the source repo by scanning the QR code on your screen. Let's get started. Let's open up our GitHub code space and get started. Once that's initialized, we'll need to create an OTel call-config-extras.yaml file. This is a totally optional file, but here we're using it to configure all of our observability backends, such as Jaeger. Next, we build our Docker images using Docker Compose build. Please note that this takes a few minutes to complete, but we've sped things up to move things along. We have a client and a server program. The client makes repeated calls to the /rolldice endpoint in server.py. We saw the source code for that earlier. Now, once that's done, we can run Docker Compose up to start our program. And once that's up and running, we can move over to Jaeger. Now, Jaeger port 16686 has been exposed in GitHub code spaces, so we can access it by going to the Ports tab off of the terminal window. When we pull up the py-otel-server service, we can see that Jaeger shows both error and non-error spans. The error spans are marked as big red circles, and these represent our die rolls that were divisible by 2. Let's click on one of the non-error spans. Here you can see just one span event in the do_roll span, along with the 2 attributes that we created for it. If we go back and pull up one of the error spans, you will notice that we see our original span event and its 2 attributes, along with an additional span event that was created automatically as soon as the divisible by 2 exception was thrown. You'll also notice an extra span in there called even_number. This span is only created if an exception is thrown. If we drill into the span, you'll notice that it includes the span error, which we created in the code, which is just a span event that captures the exceptions stack trace. Now let's turn our attention to a different observability backend. In this backend, we see a view of the do_roll spans. Here, non-error spans show up as green dots, and error spans show up as red triangles. Clicking on one of the green dots takes us to the do_roll span. On the right side, we see the single span event that we created along with its attributes. You also see the log message that we created within the span, which is associated with it. Now, we didn't see that in Jaeger because Jaeger doesn't render logs. If you click on the log message, you get more details about it. And clicking on this context view, you can see another log message that's part of the same trace. Now let's go back and look at the error span represented by the red triangle. Just like we saw in Jaeger, we now see that the do_roll span is marked in red. It also now has the span error, just like we saw in Jaeger. Again, we can click on the log message to get more details about it, and clicking on the context view shows that there are 3 log messages that are part of this trace. Going back to our trace view, we can also see the extra span even_number, which again was created when the exception was caught. It has the span error, which we created, and the log message, which we also created. And because the log message was created within the span, it gets associated to that span. Clicking on the log message reveals that it's an error, and clicking on the context view reveals that there are 2 other related log messages in that trace.